A man can lose a lot in this life, but losing his dignity? That ain't an option. My name's Wesley Irving, 58 years old. Spent half my life in the Marines, the other half making sure people with too much money and not enough common sense stay safe. Grew up on a farm outside Amarillo, Texas, early mornings, hard work, no excuses. Those lessons stuck. I built a security consulting firm from nothing, and I run it the same way I ran recon missions overseas: discipline, planning, and the certainty that hesitation gets you killed. Stella and I met 20 years ago. Back then, she wasn't wearing expensive suits or carrying a phone that never stopped buzzing. She was sharp, ambitious, but she had a softness to her. Over time, the ambition grew teeth. I didn't mind. Hell, I respected it. I held things down at home while she climbed the corporate ladder. We were a team, or so I thought. Lately, something was off. Nothing obvious, just little things. A glance too quick to turn away. A forced smile. The way she'd pick up her phone like she was expecting bad news, then brighten up when she saw whatever message had come in. People think betrayal happens in big moments, a screaming fight, a door slammed in anger, but it doesn't. It happens in inches, in pauses, in the way a woman you've spent 20 years with suddenly smells like a different brand of cologne when she comes home late. I was willing to chalk it up to stress until I found the hotel receipt, tucked into the side pocket of her purse, half crumpled. For seasons. 2 nights. The kind of place we never went to. The kind of place a man like me didn't belong unless he was working security for some asshole CEO. That's when I called Will. Something's wrong, I said. Will Bailey had been my best friend since our days in the sandbox. He ran a small PI firm out of Houston now, spent most of his time catching cheating husbands, tracking down embezzled money, and making sure the wrong people got caught doing the wrong things. You're sure? He asked. I looked at the receipt in my hand. I'm sure. Will sighed on the other end of the line. You want me to look into it? I could have said no. Could have let it ride, given Stella the benefit of the doubt. But my gut told me different, and I learned to trust my gut more than I trusted most people. Yeah, I said. Find out who. 2 days later, Will called me back. He didn't waste time. Nicholas Kelly, he said. The name sat in my ear like a slow-burning match. I knew the type. Real estate mogul. Money old enough to smell like dust. The kind of man who thought wealth made him untouchable. You got proof? I asked. Photos. They had dinner at Del Frisco's Tuesday night. Went back to his place after. She left around 6 the next morning. I didn't speak for a second. There was something final about hearing it laid out plain like that. I wasn't the kind of man to lose control, and I wasn't about to start now. Send them over, I said. You want to talk first? There's nothing to talk about. The photos came through in minutes. Stella and Kelly at a corner table, leaning in close. The way she smiled at him, real, relaxed, none of that tight-lipped corporate politeness. A hand on his arm, his hand on the small of her back as they left the restaurant. And then the last shot, her stepping into the private elevator of his penthouse, his shadow following close behind. I stared at the screen for a long time. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I wasn't a man who let emotions take the wheel, but right then, something deep and ugly curled in my chest. I put my phone down, poured a glass of whiskey, and sat on the porch, staring out at the dark stretch of land beyond the house. A few crickets chirped in the distance. The wind carried the scent of cut grass and Texas dirt. It was the kind of night that usually settled a man's mind. Not this time. Stella wasn't home yet. Said she had a late meeting. I waited, glass in hand, until I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. The front door opened, and there she was, perfect hair, tailored skirt, phone in hand like always. She smiled at me. Hey, you're up late. I nodded. Yeah. She started walking past me toward the kitchen. Long day. I'm exhausted. I watched her, saw the way she moved, easy, unbothered. A woman with no idea that the man she'd been lying to had just seen her for exactly what she was. You have a good trip? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. But I caught it. What trip? She said, playing it smooth. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of whiskey. I don't know. You tell me. She forced a laugh. Wesley, what are you talking about? I studied her face. The little details I used to love, the sharp lines of her jaw, the way her glasses slid down her nose when she was focused, looked different now. Like they belonged to a stranger. I set my glass down. Nothing, I said. Just making conversation. Her eyes flickered with something caution, maybe. But she didn't press it. She just nodded and disappeared into the house. I sat there for a long time after that. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. I had my proof. I had my plan. Now, all that was left was execution. The next morning, Stella was gone before sunrise. Big presentation at work, she'd said. I just nodded, watching her gather her things with the kind of careful efficiency that told me she'd done this 100 times before. I made coffee, black and strong, then sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The folder Will had sent was still there, sitting heavy on my screen like a loaded gun. I clicked through the images again, slow this time, forcing myself to see every detail. The way Kelly leaned in close, the casual way she touched his wrist when she laughed, the soft, relaxed expression on her face as she stepped into his penthouse. I closed the laptop and exhaled through my nose. My blood ran hot, but I kept it steady. This wasn't some bar fight where throwing a punch made everything square. This was a long game, and I planned on playing it right. By noon, I was at Will's office, a small rented space in a strip mall between a bail bondsman and a pawn shop. Will was at his desk, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up when I walked in, took one glance at my face, and pushed a fresh cup of coffee across the desk toward me. I assume you're here to talk strategy, he said. I took the coffee, sat down. She doesn't know I know. Will nodded. That's an advantage. You sure you don't just want to confront her? Skip all the cloak and dagger shit? I shook my head. Confronting her gets me tears and excuses. I'm not interested in either. Will leaned back in his chair, studying me. All right, he said. What's the move? I tapped the folder he'd given me. I want to make sure this costs her. Not just her job, not just her reputation. I want her to feel it. Will smirked. See, that's why we're friends. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a flash drive, and slid it across the desk. I did a little digging on Kelly. Turns out, he's got more skeletons than a Civil War graveyard. Tax fraud, shady business deals, a couple of NDAs with former employees. I've got contacts who'd love to leak this to the right people. I nodded. Do it. Will sat forward. And Stella. She built her career on being untouchable. She thinks her reputation is ironclad. I want to put a crack in that. I tapped my fingers against the desk. Who does she report to? Will flipped through his notes. A guy named Ray Eldridge. Old-school finance type. Cares more about image than anything else. If he gets wind that his golden girl is screwing a married client, he won't hesitate to cut her loose. Good. How do we make sure he finds out? Will grinned. We get creative. I left his office feeling the familiar rush of a well-laid plan falling into place. It had been a long time since I'd worked a mission like this, but the instincts never left. That night, Stella came home late again. I was sitting in my chair on the porch, nursing a beer, when she walked up the steps. She hesitated when she saw me. Didn't think you'd still be up, she said, unlocking the door. I didn't answer, just watched as she stepped inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She smelled like perfume and hotel air. I let her go. Let her think everything was normal. The next morning, I put the first phase of my plan into motion. I sent an email from a burner account, attached a few carefully selected photos, nothing explicit, just enough to raise questions. Stella and Kelly at the restaurant. The way she looked at him. The intimate closeness of their conversation. The email went straight to Ray Eldridge's inbox. By lunchtime, the corporate rumor mill was already buzzing. Will called to update me. Your wife's been called into an unscheduled meeting, he said, sounding amused. Word is, it's not going well. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of it. This was about setting the record straight. Actions had consequences. She made her choice. Now she had to live with it. By the time she got home, she looked rattled. Her usual composed, polished demeanor had cracks in it. She dropped her bag on the counter and rubbed her temples. Rough day. I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She sighed, pacing the kitchen. Office politics. You know how it is. I nodded, sipping my coffee. I bet. She studied me for a second, like she was trying to figure out if I knew something. I just met her gaze, steady and unreadable. She didn't say anything else, just poured herself a glass of wine and went upstairs. I let her go, let her think she was still ahead. She had no idea that by tomorrow, the cracks would spread even further. The next morning, Stella left the house early, moving faster than usual. I watched her from the porch, sipping my coffee as she backed the car out of the driveway, her phone already pressed to her ear. Damage control. She'd be working overtime trying to figure out where the leak came from, how to plug it, how to spin it. I had no intention of giving her that chance. By mid-morning, Will called. Your wife's office is on fire. Figuratively. What's the word? She's not fired. Not yet. But Eldridge is pissed. They had a closed-door meeting for an hour, and after that, she canceled the rest of her schedule. Seems like she's scrambling. She'll go to Kelly, I said. No doubt. But the timing's bad for her. We'll let out a dry chuckle. Kelly's got his own mess to deal with. I just got confirmation. An SEC investigation just opened into one of his holding companies. That little nudge we gave his business rivals worked like a charm. I didn't smile, but I felt something settle in my chest. Kelly had built his empire by knowing exactly when to slip out of the room before the house burned down. This time, I made sure the doors were locked. By lunchtime, Stella called me. First time in months she'd called during the day, like a dutiful wife checking in. I let it ring twice before picking up. Hey, she said, her voice controlled, too even. Hey. A beat of silence. Then, how's your day? I took a slow sip of coffee. Fine. Yours. She exhaled sharply. Rough. I waited. Let her squirm in the silence. She didn't break. Just a lot of stress at work, she added. I bet. Another pause. I could hear the tension in her breathing, the way she was trying to gauge me. Finally, she said, we should do something this weekend. Just the two of us. She was testing the waters, seeing if she could smooth things over without knowing what I knew. I kept my voice even. Maybe. That wasn't the answer she wanted, but she let it go. All right. I'll see you at home. When she hung up, I set my phone down and stared out the window. She felt it now. The shift. The unraveling. And it was only going to get worse. By the afternoon, things accelerated. I got another call from Will. She met Kelly at his private club, he said. Looked tense. Lot of hand-waving. Then she left after 20 minutes, looking like she got punched in the gut. Kelly's cutting her loose. Looks like it. I imagine he sees the walls closing in and doesn't want to get caught holding the bag. That was the problem with people like him. They played the game well, but loyalty was just a transaction. The moment she became a liability, she was disposable. Stella didn't come home at her usual time. I didn't call her. Didn't text. Just sat on the porch, watching the sky turn the deep burnt orange of a Texas sunset. When she finally pulled into the driveway, it was almost 9. She came inside, moving slower than usual, her face drawn. She set her purse down carefully, like the weight of the day was still sitting on her shoulders. I let the silence stretch. She stood in the kitchen, running a hand through her hair, then turned to me. Something's going on at work. Her voice was carefully controlled, but I saw the cracks in her composure. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. She hesitated, choosing her words. Someone's been spreading rumors. About me. About a pause. About things that aren't true. I kept my expression unreadable. That's so? She studied me. I saw the flicker of suspicion in her eyes, the calculation. Then she exhaled, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. I'll handle it. She thought she could fix it. That's what she'd always done. Navigated problems, controlled outcomes. But she wasn't dealing with some corporate merger. She was dealing with me. I stood up, stretching my shoulders. Long day. I'm turning in. She frowned slightly, like she expected me to press for details, to offer sympathy. I gave her none. As I walked past her, I saw it in her face. For the first time, she was scared. By morning, she was up before me, pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear, voice low but tense. I poured my coffee slow, listening to the clipped sentences, the barely controlled frustration. Damage control. She was calling in favors, trying to find out who had put the knife in her back. I sat at the table, flipping through the paper like I wasn't paying attention. When she hung up, she turned to me, arms crossed, a look on her face like she was trying to decide if she should say something. Something on your mind? I asked, taking a sip of coffee. She hesitated, then shook her head. Just work bullshit. Office politics. That right? She narrowed her eyes, studying me. You know anything about this? I set my cup down. Looked her in the eye. About what? She didn't blink. Someone's been spreading lies. I don't know who, but it's getting personal. I nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Lies? Huh. She shifted, adjusting the strap on her purse. Yeah. I leaned back in my chair. Seems to me, people only spread stories when there's something to talk about. For a second, she froze. Just for a second. Then she exhaled, forced a tight smile. I don't have time for this. She grabbed her keys and walked out the door, heels clicking sharp against the hardwood. I waited until I heard the car pull away before pulling out my phone. Called Will. She's squirming, I said. Good. Because it's about to get worse. How bad? Will chuckled. Let's just say by the time she gets to work, her name's gonna be all over the office. A few more anonymous emails, and her golden reputation's gonna start looking a little tarnished. I nodded, staring out the window at the empty driveway. Let me know when she breaks. Will do. I hung up, finished my coffee, and waited. By noon, the first Real crack appeared. She called me twice. I let it ring. Third time, I picked up. Wesley, she said, voice tight, controlled. We need to talk. I took my time answering. I'm listening. Not over the phone. I checked my watch. Busy today. Make time. She was trying to regain control, trying to dictate the terms. That wasn't going to happen. I'll be home when I'm home, I said, then hung up. Let her sweat. By the time I pulled into the driveway that evening, the porch light was already on, and she was waiting inside, arms crossed, foot tapping against the floor. The moment I walked in, she started. This is you, isn't it? I set my keys down on the counter. What's me? She took a sharp step forward. The emails. The photos. The rumors. You think I don't know when I'm being set up? I met her stare, unflinching. Set up? I let the word hang in the air. Stella, you set yourself up the second you stepped into that hotel with Kelly. Her face paled, just slightly. I don't know what. I cut her off. Don't lie. Not to me. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked lost. I stepped closer, voice low. You think you're the only one who knows how to play this game? I've been watching you, Stella. For months. I saw the late meetings, the long trips, the way you came home smelling like his cologne. And now, you want to act like you're the victim? She swallowed hard, jaw tightening. It wasn't like that. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. You're right. It was worse. Silence stretched between us. Then she straightened her shoulders, trying to regain some ground. So what now? You're going to ruin me? Destroy everything I've built. I held her gaze. I didn't do that. You did. Her nostrils flared. You're enjoying this, aren't you? No, I said, and it was the truth. But I'll be damned if I let you walk away without consequences. She let out a bitter laugh. And what about us, Wesley? What happens to this marriage? I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Marriage? I shook my head. That ended the second you let another man touch you. Her face crumpled for half a second before she caught herself. She exhaled through her nose, then turned away, hands on her hips. You think you've won, but you haven't. You're just a bitter man trying to punish me because you couldn't keep up. I didn't react. Didn't let her see even a flicker of anger. That was her last card, trying to provoke me, make me emotional. It wasn't going to work. Instead, I just picked up my keys. We're done here. She turned back sharply. Where are you going? I paused at the door. Out. Then I left her standing in the kitchen, alone. I drove without a destination, just letting the road stretch out ahead of me. The quiet hum of the engine was steady, familiar. I wasn't angry. Not in the way most men would be. No shouting, no broken dishes. That kind of rage burns fast and leaves you empty. What I felt was colder, more settled, like a storm rolling in slow, deliberate. Eventually, I ended up at Bailey's Bar, a hole in the wall just outside of town where nobody asked questions. The kind of place where men sat with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the door. Will was already there, nursing a beer, a knowing look on his face. Well, he asked as I slid into the seat across from him. She knows, I said. He let out a low chuckle. Bet that was a fun conversation. She tried to play the victim. Of course she did. He took a sip of his beer, shaking his head. So what's the next move? She's already lost Kelly. Work's turning on her. Next step is making sure she can't climb back out. Will nodded, stretching his fingers out against the glass. I may have something for that. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table. I opened it. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Some offshore account tied to Kelly's company with Stella's name attached, in just the right places. She's dirty, Will said. Not just personally. Professionally. I studied the numbers, the dates. Stella was careful, but not careful enough. It wasn't enough to put her in handcuffs, but it was enough to make sure she'd never work in high finance again. I folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket. You know what to do. Will smirked. Happy to oblige. We sat there for a while, drinking in silence. The bar was dim, smelling of old wood and spilled whiskey. A few regulars sat hunched over their drinks, watching some game on the TV in the corner. It was a place built for men like us, men who didn't talk unless there was something worth saying. After a while, Will glanced at me. You thought about what comes next? I took another sip, let the burn settle in my chest. Yeah, And I walk away. He nodded like he expected that. No second chances? I looked at him. Steady. Would you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I left the bar late, drove home with the windows down, the night air sharp against my face. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the dim glow from Stella's office window. She was still fighting, still trying to patch up the sinking ship. I let myself in quietly, went straight to my study, and locked the door behind me. Sat down at my desk, took out the bank records, and opened my laptop. It didn't take long to type up the email, to attach the files, to address it to just the right people. Eldridge. The board of directors. A couple of SEC contacts had passed along. I read it over once, then hit send. Then I shut the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. It was done. The next morning, I woke early, same as always. Made coffee, watched the sky shift from black to blue through the kitchen window. The house was quiet. Stella's office door was shut, but I could hear the occasional shuffle of papers, the muted murmur of her voice on a call. Desperation had a sound. I sat at the table, scrolling through the news. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for. A small article buried in the business section. Kelly Group faces scrutiny over internal financial irregularities. The article wasn't long, just a couple of paragraphs, but I knew it was only the beginning. My phone buzzed. Will, check your email, he said. I set the paper down and opened my laptop. There it was. An internal memo from Stella's company. Suspension pending investigation. I exhaled slow, taking a sip of coffee. That was fast. Will chuckled. When you drop a live grenade in a boardroom, people tend to move quick. I closed my laptop and leaned back. What about Kelly? He's panicking. He called a meeting this morning, trying to put out fires. But the kind of money he's playing with? You don't just sweep that under the rug. I didn't say anything. Just listened. You good? Will asked. I thought about it for a second. About how easy it would have been to let it slide, to pretend I didn't see what was right in front of me. But that wasn't who I was. Yeah, I said. I'm good. By the time Stella came downstairs, she looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was still damp from the shower, dark circles under her eyes. She sat across from me at the table, fingers drumming against her coffee cup. We need to talk, she said. I took my time looking up. About what? She let out a sharp breath. Cut the bullshit. Wesley, you did this. I set my mug down, meeting her stare. Did what? You went after me. After my job. You, she exhaled, shaking her head. You want revenge. Fine. You got it. But what now? You think ruining me makes you the better person? I watched her, the way her hands tightened around the cup, the way her shoulders stiffened like she was holding everything together with sheer willpower. You ruined yourself, I said finally. I just let the right people know. Her jaw clenched. And what? You walk away now? Like none of this ever happened. I studied her for a long moment. The woman I married had been smart, driven, ruthless when she needed to be. But this version of her? She was grasping. She had played the game and lost, and now she was looking for something, anything to hold on to. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm moving forward. A beat of silence. Then she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. With what? Wesley? Your pride? Your principles? She shook her head. I was right. You never could keep up. I didn't react. That was the thing about people like her. They thought cutting deep made them stronger. That if they could get a rise out of you, they still had power. I pushed my chair back and stood. I'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the week. Her breath hitched, just barely. Then she straightened, smoothing a hand over her hair, regaining whatever composure she had left. Fine. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Where are you going? She asked. I glanced back. Anywhere but here. Then I walked out, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me feeling like the first clean breath I'd taken in years. The divorce was quick. Clean. She didn't fight me on the house, didn't try to squeeze me for more than what was fair. Maybe she was too busy trying to salvage what was left of her career, or maybe she just wanted to be rid of me as much as I wanted to be rid of her. Either way, I didn't lose any sleep over it. Kelly wasn't as lucky. The SEC probe turned into something bigger, and within a month, his empire started crumbling. Investors pulled out. Board members abandoned ship. The media had a field day. By the time the dust settled, he was forced to resign. Last I heard, he was holed up in some Florida mansion, trying to convince himself he still mattered. Stella disappeared from the corporate world. The suspension turned into a quiet termination, her name scrubbed from the company's website like she'd never existed. She tried bouncing back, but finance was a small world, and no firm wanted to take on someone with a scandal attached to their name. I heard through the grapevine she moved into a small apartment in the city, far from the glass towers she used to rule. The kind of place where ambition went to die. I didn't think about her much after that. Life got simpler. I took on fewer clients, spent more time at the range, reconnected with people I hadn't seen in years. Ruby visited more, which was good. She never asked about her mother, and I never brought her up. Some things didn't need to be said. One afternoon, I got a call from Will. "You hear about Stella?" he asked. I adjusted my grip on the cold beer in my hand. No. She tried reaching out to Kelly. Guess she figured they were in the same boat now. He let out a short laugh. He wouldn't take her calls. I smirked. Fitting. Figured you'd like that. I didn't answer, just took a long sip, letting the silence stretch. Anyway, Will continued. Some of the guys are getting together this weekend. You in? I glanced out at the land stretching beyond my porch. The sun was starting to dip low, throwing long shadows over the dirt and scrub. The air was crisp, clean. I'll be there, I said. Will chuckled. Knew you would be. I hung up, setting the phone down next to me. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite and distant rain. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. And that was all that mattered.